Good afternoon all. Welcome to this APM Program Management SIG webinar on Program Management in the Transport Sector. It's just a quick introduction to the Program Management SIG. I'm Ed Wallington, the SIG Chair, and I'm also joined by my colleague Vivian Waters. As you can see on the slide there, our aim is to be the international group on Program Management and translating that as best practice through the SIG membership and wider. We work in a series of work streams covering events, communications, education, publications, and supporting our corporate members. For more information on what the SIG does, you can have a look at our website, apm.org.uk/progm, and follow us on Twitter at apmprogmsig. I'd like to introduce Arnab, who's going to give us a case study from TfL around program management in the transport sector. Arnab and his team have been working in collaboration with over 300 people in TfL, building on the work done previously to develop the TfL pathway. So after that short intro, Arnab, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ed, and good morning or good afternoon wherever you may be. I was just noting to my PM colleagues that the figurine on the right there with the beard, it looks a little bit like me, except mine is now grey as opposed to the black. So what I'd like to cover in the next 30 minutes is very briefly an introduction to me. I know Ed has just covered most of the main points. The main body of the presentation for us will then be the pathway, where I'll cover some of the key elements and a few of the developments planned, which will be the next steps. However, but a thesis really for me, and this is primarily a personal view running through, is that the methodology and the process, no matter what it is, will not deliver a program. They serve a purpose, but in anything other than purely routine work, they're really only an aid only. And they do not think, they don't create, they're not sentient beings, they don't take decisions. So that will be the thesis which will be running through this pack over the next 30 minutes or so. And so starting with a little bit of an introduction to me. Now, before we get into our program management and so on, I have to say my initial ambition was really to be the greatest opening batsman of my generation. The gentleman on the left was my idol growing up, but my mother insisted too much on doing homework, so that didn't happen. So I've resorted to other means, and I'm currently hoping that the Over 50s Golf Tour will be able to take my talents in a few years' time. The reality may appear mundane on the surface, but really I've been privileged to work for two very great organizations that, because they've also been in infrastructure primarily, that in what I might term, they make a difference. So Alstom Power is now actually more accurately now GE, and Transport for London, which we will be talking about in a second. Now, I've worked in various functions, as Ed may have mentioned, so people listening in actually, I'm sure all of you have worked in various industries, and there are many, many common themes in roles, and no matter which industry or function. So what I mean by that is whether, for instance, if you're in sales or change management, it's really about understanding a need, meeting it, and supporting people through it. Whether you're doing project management or program management in an industrial organization or as a policy unit, it's about being clear on the requirements and being disciplined about delivery. So in essence, again, another theme which will be running through this is that there are some basic things which we can all do, and we don't have to be reliant on the methodology. It is an aid. So if you move on to the poll 1, and the question there is, follow a methodology and you will deliver a good program. So is that true or is that false?
Feedback on that, Arnab, is 37% true, 63% false.
Okay, we will come back to the poll results at the end because they do come together at the end. So moving on to pathway theory then. It is the integrated project program and portfolio delivery methodology for TfL. It arose out of the Commissioner's 2012 message, which said that in order to be an integrated organization, we had to have a common methodology, common assurance processes, a common management system, and a clear approach to how we deliver together. So in terms of, just to give you some idea of what we were dealing with across TfL, 21 business units, we had delivering projects and at least 10 to 12 methodologies. The outcome, or the benefits really for doing something like this, was to really develop a structure for documenting what a delivery team does, hopefully more assured delivery, and the others that you can read on the slide. However, the key real issue for us was to try and create a common vocabulary across the organization so that project teams or delivery teams or functional people moving across the organization could see the same thing, and that we had a sort of base layer of what was acceptable and what was good. So while a lot of work goes around developing in terms of the benefits of the methodology, one of the real things was trying to get a common vocabulary for the whole organization. Before we begin really into looking at the details of Pathway, it would perhaps be useful to give an overview of the TfL investment program. So TfL has a very large investment program. About 3,000 people are employed in the delivery of it. And you will see on the next slide, which shows the examples of the TfL investment program, the huge range that we cover. So there is traditional infrastructure such as Northern Line extension and cycle superhighway. So those of you who've been in London and around London will know that there's a big push on cycling. Whereas there's also big major business change activity in the bottom right-hand corner there, which says Fit for Future, which won't mean very much to most of those listening, but it is the huge business change program where ticket offices have been closed and there have been a whole new ways of working. And so, of course, always infrastructure projects require soft aspects and business change projects require technology. But leaving that aside for a second, project and program management is equally applicable to all of those pieces of work and not just your traditional infrastructure project management. Moving on to the next slide then, the Pathway SharePoint site. That is our home site, and I'd like to stay on that slide for a little while. The bits that are in color are really the areas, the tools, which we will be going through in the next few slides going forward. They look at the life cycle, they look at something called the product matrix, handbooks, which are clear, and something called the PPMP, which I will talk about. And then after that, we'll examine in more detail some of the other aspects of the tools. But also, you will see in the grayed out area, just to reduce the definition on those, but it's important to cover them, which is to look at areas on knowledge management and lessons learned, training, information, and contacts. So it's not a question of developing a methodology and just throwing it out there, hoping people take it up. It's also then having the information to hand, continuously improving it, having special interest groups actually around different aspects of it, and supporting and helping people to use it and indeed improve it. So the next slide is the Pathway SharePoint site. Not very exciting, but it just shows in more detail the various elements of what we have on the main site, and you will see that it's a mixture of tools and support. The first element of Pathway is the set of life cycles, but before diving into that, it'd be useful to just set the context a little bit. So when we talk about the delivery environment on the next slide, this to me is really, really important. There's a lot of literature around program management, and today we're talking program management, but it applies equally to others as well. In a lot of literature around program management, whether you look at managing successful programs is the classic one. A program is really considered to be the whole thing, from actually having the idea through works in a slightly different model, in that we have areas of the business which do business planning and which do strategy and service development. And they, if you like, reside in the box at the top called Organisational Strategy. They are the ones who look 20 years ahead, see what's happening to London, the population growth, and what the organisation needs to do to keep up. On the right-hand side of the slide, where you see operational business, that is our operational business. So these are our maintenance and our operators who keep the service going on a daily basis. And in the middle is the project delivery or the program delivery area of the organization. So often there is, well, not often, there is sometimes some confusion as to what is a program. We have very clearly set out that the delivery bit of the organization is what is boxed in the slide called delivery environment. So when you talk about a delivery program, we deliver the outputs or the outcomes that the sponsors in strategy and service development actually define for us in terms of requirements. So whereas the sponsors and the operators and the maintainers are really owners of the business case and subsequently benefit realization. So what we see is the sponsors relating its needs into requirements, the program then delivers the requirements, and the operators and the maintainers then realize the benefits, because of course in infrastructure the benefits come over 20, 30 years and not just immediately on delivery. So if you move on to the next slide, which are the life cycles, you have a project life cycle, a program life cycle, and a delivery portfolio life cycle. Now we will come back to these, but just as a clarification, what we mean by delivery portfolio isn't what an organization might mean by a portfolio, i.e. an investment portfolio. So this is very much how we manage projects and programs. So it's a portfolio of smaller projects, but I will explain that a little bit later on. So on the next slide, which is about sponsorship and delivery, you will see triangles, and this is also something I found that in the project management and program management community, everybody loves triangles, so we have used a triangle. So for the organizationally, you have strategy at the top. This is TfL, thinking about how it remains and becomes increasingly relevant to the city. From the strategy, you get down to the service and strategic requirements, which then heads down into sponsorship. And then again, the red box is where the requirements are delivered. So that is really where Pathway is located. It is in the delivery of the program and not at the front in terms of the strategy, or indeed subsequently in realization. Excuse me. So hopefully that sets the context. So if you move on then to the next slide, which is about the Pathway delivery life cycles. So as I mentioned, it defines 3 life cycles: a project, a program, and delivery portfolio. Each, as you might expect, has a number of stages, and the end of each stage again is an opportunity for a decision or to continue the work or not. Stages may be combined, so there is sometimes a tendency for teams to look at a series of stages, which happen to be 6 in this particular case, and decide, well, obviously my project needs 6 stages. Doesn't necessarily have to happen that way, and what we always stress is the idea for professional judgment. So it's quite feasible to combine, let's say, outcome definition and feasibility into one stage, concept and detailed design into one stage, depending on the complexity and size of the project. So they can be combined. So if we start, because we're talking about programs, we start on the next slide on the program definition and life cycle. A classical definition, really, a group of related projects managed in a coordinated way to obtain benefits. 4 generic stages, which you can see on the slide, and at the program level, they cannot be combined. Having said they can be combined, that's true of projects. At the program level, they cannot be combined, because you really need that time to set up in terms of a major program going forward. So Ed mentioned that I'm working currently for a program called New Tube for London, which is rolling stock signaling platform works for a series of lines on the tube network. and that is clearly a very, very complex program. And so we are in really towards the back end of the define phase, trying to nail down our requirements, and that really you cannot spend too much time on that. And then at the end of gate B for pathway is very, very similar. If some of you are listening are familiar with managing successful programs, it's modeled on that life cycle. So the end of gate B for pathway is very much the end of define for MSP. The project life cycle. This is mostly what people will be dealing with, because we generally have a series of programs supported and delivered through a series of projects. So classical definition of a project: a set of interrelated tasks to be executed over a fixed period and within certain cost and time limitations. 6 generic stages, and as I was mentioning earlier, combining stages is possible depending on the scale and complexity of the project. Nothing earth-shattering about the life cycle and the descriptions that you can see also on the slide. The only point to note of interest, I think, is at the end of stage 2, which is feasibility. The idea would be to narrow down onto a single option, which would then be further detailed in concept and detailed design. We needed to really develop it, and I'm not sure how widespread the idea of a delivery portfolio is, but I'll give you an example of what we were trying to do with this, which is something like the one I'm in now, which is a new for London, or many others that you will be familiar with. They are classical programs in the sense that all the projects have to deliver before you get the utility, and that is really a program. Whereas in what we've set up in our delivery portfolio is really pieces of work which are done independently. So if you're replacing long lines of track, or you're refurbishing long series of stations, then they're not dependent on each other. And so, but they need to be managed together so that you get the economies of scale. So really those are what we have defined as delivery portfolios. And if I can spend 2 minutes on an analogy, the way sometimes I explain it is if you were, building a house, then your house really isn't livable until, say, you have all of the windows in, and that's a program. So even though the windows may be a very small percentage in cost for your whole program of your house, without them, they're unlivable. So that's a program. A portfolio would be if you have a continuous program or a continuous schedule of repainting or refurbishing your house, in the sense that it's still completely livable and pieces of work are completely independent. However, they need to be done. So that's really what we try to differentiate in terms of a program and a delivery portfolio. So could we move on then to pole 2, which is TfL pathway is a radical departure rather than based on industry good practice. There is a reason we're doing these polls, and I've sort of hinted at it previously, because there are some major themes which come out of what we're trying to do, and we'll come back to the results at the end. Moving on to the next slide then, which is about the pathway handbooks, and the subsequent one, which show the whole family of what we have developed. Now, when I say developed, I think that is a very important point to make, which is that even today I sell myself as a change person and not necessarily a process person. So when I say we developed, it wasn't a small group of people working in a room and then having a ta-da moment saying, this is it, this is the methodology that we will all do. Absolutely not. We had, from memory, because this was a couple of years ago now, we had about 15 special interest groups, each with about 10 people. I had a steering group of another 15 senior people. We had a business users rep, business representatives group as well, and the users group. So this was, we involved and engaged actively with more than 300 people across the business to develop a methodology for the business. So what you have at the structure at the top there is you have a pathway manual, which is a sort of general guide, and then a series of key documents below it, which try and set out the principles, not in complete depth, but the principles of what good looks like in each of those areas. So I won't go through them all, but some of the key ones are around commissioning and handover, so having a proper handover, around project control, which is under managing a program. We obviously have the Lifecycles one. We have people change, so for projects who have a lot of people change involved in those as well, and so on, and the business case development, etc., and engineering. Again, some of the vocabulary there will be unfamiliar to you. We will cover some of that in the next few slides, but this one really tries to take apart the handbook on governance. Now, as you might expect, like any large organization, whether public sector or private sector, we have lots of rules. And we have lots of rules to make sure we are spending the money wisely with the right value for money, and rules and layers. And so to get through those rules and layers, you need documentation. And so what you see there is we have a governance handbook, and underneath the governance handbook, for instance, around about the middle to the right, you have something called an authority guidance, and then you will also have authority submission templates in the purple about 3 layers up. So this is all trying to standardize and trying to take the mystery out of what a project or a program has to do. But a major point here is that the real work, not completing the templates. Sometimes people tend to get very hung up on what does the template say. The real work, of course, is in doing the work to be able to populate those templates. And now, again, as you might imagine, we have similar templates for requirements or for execution plans and the like. Filling in the headings does not create the value. A document is just a reflection of the work you have done. So the complexity, the skill, is in actually developing a set of requirements. The requirements template will not do the work for you. Skilled project managers, project engineers, risk people, sponsors, operators, and maintainers work together to define the requirements, which find their home in a document, but that document doesn't do the work for you. So again, it becomes a sort of exam-like pass to say, I have done the document, it must be right. Absolutely not. The document does set quality criteria, but they are at a fairly high level, and for something as complicated as project and program management, unless it's completely routine, doing the template doesn't guarantee quality. It's doing the work properly and then reflecting that within the document itself. So we have a series of documents we have termed the Pathway Product Matrix. So I mentioned right at the very beginning that I would tell you what a PPMP was, and this is it, a Pathway Product Matrix Plan. That's a PPMP, and we'll go into that in a second. What we've tried to show there is you have a project or a program in the middle. And by the way, please don't think that a project is only delivered by project managers. A project is delivered by that whole family of people, from sponsors to project engineers and functional experts and so on. So this is a collaborative and cooperative effort, and not just a project management effort. So what we've tried to show there is that you have a project or a program in the middle, and then around that you have a load of people looking in, saying, are you doing the right thing? So whether that's engineering, whether that's consents, health and safety, legal, finance, we've given them a big cloud because they're very important, commercial, resourcing, and so on and so on. So we have many people looking down at a project or a program, saying, are you doing the right thing? So that takes us on to poll 3, which is, as a program manager, you find that your stakeholders are always consistent.
Interesting. So up to 80%, that's 100% false.
Thank you very much. So on to the next slide, an extract of the Pathway Product matrix. We have versions of these for the project, the program, and the delivery portfolio. The one you have on the slide there is for the project one, because that's the one that's really most used, but the principles are absolutely the same. So what they are really trying to do is to corral all of the stakeholders into one place. So the primary work that we did in developing Pathway was to go to all of the people who look at the project or a program and say to them, what do you need? Because the bane of a program manager's life was somebody at the last minute coming up from the side and saying, you should have come to us first, you shouldn't have done one of these, or you should have done one of these. And so what we have really tried to do is put into one place the whole range of things that a project or a program needs to do. Now, your life will be very different from our life. So in my previous incarnation, I'm sure building a power station in Outer Mongolia has completely different needs to developing new rolling stock for a 150-year-old network. And so the needs are very different. But the principle is the same, which is that if certain functions or certain areas need a notification or need a design review, then it's up to that function to define up front what they require from the program, and that is primarily the task of the product matrix. The product matrix in totality has lots of products or documents, so we're well over 100. However, there are some core products, and the core products are requirements, as you can see, execution plan, and so on. Now, I'm not sure that anybody can really argue the fact that for a program or anything that you do, what are you delivering, how will you deliver it, when, what could go wrong are items that everybody needs. Allied to that is you agree up front which documents are needed, which is the PPMP. You get buy-in as you go through stage gate certificates. You monitor progress. You don't get given £100 and say, go away and deliver me something. You should be measured on the pounds being spent. And something called an IAP right at the end, which is stands for an integrated assurance plan. So what are your design reviews? What are your procurement sign-offs? What are your stage gates? And how will you know that what you've finally developed and are delivering is safe? So that's an integrated assurance plan. So these are things we would expect every program to have, and that doesn't seem unfair, I hope, does it? So each of the products, we call them products, you could call them documents. Each of the product tries to put down what is the product for, and then it asks applicability, where we've been able to a template and content, what is a sort of base quality criteria, and very importantly, what is the RACI. So that's a classical product description. RACI stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed. This is again an extract from a product. What we're saying there is that the project manager and the project engineer is responsible for doing the work, for actually writing it. In this case, the project manager is accountable to make sure that it's a relevant and good quality product. Who do they have to consult, and then who do they have to inform? So each of our 100 products or more has those, and they act as guidance for project and program teams to see who needs to be consulted and who needs to be accountable and who needs to do the work, and finally who needs to sign off. Now, the Pathway Product Management Plan. As I mentioned, if a program has 90 odd products and a project has 150 odd products, you would be hard pressed to know which exactly are the ones that you have to do. So what we've set up is a questionnaire, and that questionnaire asks a series of questions which then allows the program or the project to define which products it needs to do. And the best way to really, instead of talking about it in generic, I use examples. It's not the most exciting example in the world. I'll use the example anyway, which is within the health and safety world, as I understand it, if you were going to go on site, then sometimes you have to create something called an F10 form. Now, this is very detailed, I know, but please bear with me. Now, somebody coming in new to the industry may not know when you need an F10 form or not. So our questionnaire sets out the key question, which is to say, will you be on site for a certain period, and will you have more than a certain number of people on that site? If the answer to either of those is yes, then you have to fill in an F10 form. So again, we're not asking at any point anybody to decide without information on what they need for their program. It is very much dependent on the context and the information for that program. And our questionnaire really works our way through that to make sure that people do the right products. And so we're very much outcome-based in the view of saying, not you must do this particular product, you do it for a purpose. And doing too many products is just as bad, and I use that word, as doing too few. So just to finish off on this topic, as you might imagine, an engineering program will have a lot more in terms of collateral, in terms of products and design work and so on and so forth, than say a business change program, which will be primarily defined around the people aspects and should have a much smaller scale of documentation. So we're now looking at the step-by-step guide PPMP homepage. There's a page called Create the Project, which asks a series of questions, and then the next one, which is the questionnaire, which again carries on to say, complete the questionnaire characterizing your work. The answers provided will drive a list of suggested products. Again, that is really, really an important word. It says suggested products. And because what we have tried to create with Pathway is applicable to a rolling stock project as much as an office move project, or a program. So really what we're trying to say here is, at a top level, typically on how you have characterized your program, then you have these products to do. But each one is different. So you have a set of professional managers, project manager, the health and safety, program manager at the top, and the sponsor and others saying, okay, the list looks okay, but we don't really have to do product A, B, and C. Or you could equally argue, well, yes, what's suggested is fine, but actually we need a little bit more. So if you go on to the next one, which is the step-by-step guide, review the product list, that's exactly the case, that people then have to review the product list and then finalize. So whole 4, if I may, as a program manager, assurance is to be welcomed. So one of the key principles of Pathway, if I move on to delivery assurance and assurance planning, is in many ways Pathway hasn't designed assurance. There are a lot of people in the business, whether we go from the general counsel or the organization's standing orders through to internal audit and its programs and internal assurance and its programs. They are really programs, stakeholders, and what we have tried to do in Pathway is to reflect their needs within the structure. So we have what is something which is very prevalent now in the industry, is first, second, and third line assurance. So delivery teams are, as the slide says, are accountable for managing their assurance activities in terms of product quality, holding gates, and so on. Then we have the second line of assurance, which comes in from outside the program, given its risk and complexity, from a TfL level, and then the third line of assurance, which are external reviews, and they may be sponsored by the Department for Transport, which is DFT, or the mayoral, or indeed anybody else who has a key holding within Transport for London. So the overall structure is a first, second, third line of assurance, and what we have in Pathway is an integrated assurance plan which people are guided through so that the needs of assurance are met within the program. We have tried to really differentiate between reviews and gates. So review is where information or products can be questioned, and Pathway has a number. So we have design reviews, commercial reviews, confidence checks, and so on. And they can happen at any point within a stage. So if you've finished, for instance, concept design, you're into detailed design, you will imagine that there are lots of reviews and so on which happen through that stage. Anybody who's been in the program management field will not see anything new here. It's a gate, as we define it there, at any point in the at a point in the life cycle where a key no-go decision must be made. It could be about transition to the next stage, and what that decision is based on is the completeness of the work. So how many products have been that we agreed would be needed to be done? Have they been signed off? Have they been approved? And the confidence provided by the reviews. So we mentioned reviews in the previous slide. So the review outcomes, a lot of those come together at a gate to say, well, is everything that you said you would do, have you done? And does all the work that you have done hang together? And do we have evidence of that through the reviews that have taken place? So that is a gate. Previously we talked about renewal. Reviews. Because next we're going to talk about renewal, which is that Pathway was developed through 2012. It was released in the summer of 2013, and the Commissioner released it himself throughout the organization. But nothing stands still. Everything has to be improved and made better. So our Pathway renewal scope on the next slide. Definitely, I think what we have today, perhaps not the most user-friendly. So a new look and feel is something that we're looking at. Improved characterization. So at the moment there is a view that perhaps there is too much professional judgment, and an improved characterization. And that improved characterization can happen at a customized level for different projects and programs. So a program like New Tube for London can customize Pathway for its use, just as a cycling superhighway program can do so as well. And so we will increasingly see different parts of the business take Pathway as the base and then customize for itself, which is absolutely the right thing to do. Some process work. So given the nature of the organization, Pathway is very much a product-based methodology. It doesn't really do process. It relies on competent people developing a good document, not spend too much time on lots of process flows underneath it. However, each business area can do so and have done, and that is a road that will continue. Workflows. Right now there's a lot of wet signatures. There's a lot of reliance on people actually signing documents. Wouldn't it be great if you can move to a really quick and reliable workflow system, and continued training support? While we have training courses, that does mean people traveling to and back and forth. Really effective e-learning modules, and that is also something that the current team who own Pathway are looking at. So finally, I want to finish off on the very last slide, which is really having gone through all of that. If you will allow me a little bit of flippancy, which is, are you a flipper or a chef, a driver or a passenger? And what I mean by that is the following: that if you were doing a process, and let's, for the sake of argument, I've chosen one of them there, of the major brands. If you were in the kitchen there, you and I, and we were given a process, it's very likely that the process is so rigid and so repetitive, and the materials are so repetitive, that the burger that you provide will be very similar, or if not identical, to the one that I can cook up. However, put us in a kitchen, give us a recipe and some raw material, and I can almost guarantee that our burgers will taste very different. For the other analogy, if you were traveling from A to B, if you took a train then the only decision that you have to make is to get on the train, get on the right train, hopefully. If you happen to get on the right train, then you can let the process deliver you to your destination. However, if I give you a map and a car, then getting safely from A to B without killing anybody, without getting lost, and efficiently, then that is your skill which will determine how effectively you get from A to B. And my contention really is that a lot of people and a lot of the industry which focuses on process, there is perhaps a belief that put a process in place and you will get that completely repetition and achievement of quality that you get on the sort of the left-hand side of that slide. In reality, project management, program management, or indeed most other key fields of activity that an organization does, whether that's strategy or sales or R&D, and you're really very much at the right-hand side of the slide, which is, yes, we have the basics, yes, we have an aid, and yes, we have a framework, but the real work is done by professionals and skillful professionals such as those listening on this webinar.
Thank you for that, Arnab. That was a pretty comprehensive run through TfL pathway. Part 1, if I just share the results of that. If you follow a methodology and you will deliver a good program, true 37%, false 63%.
I'm glad of that result because it really chimes with the first one, with my very last slide, which is, methodology can be very good. It just depends so much on context and where you actually are. But when we talk about complex program management or anything approaching complexity, then the methodology can give you a base case or an aid memoir or things you shouldn't forget and stakeholder needs and all of those things and a sort of a set of quality criteria. But actually the real work isn't completing the templates. The real work is doing the work in order to be able to do the documentation and fulfill the methodology. And the methodology will not deliver you a good program. Any methodology, it's you who deliver that program.
Okay, brilliant. So let's now go on to slide poll 2. And this was TfL pathways, a radical departure rather than based on industry good practice, true or false. True 13%, false 88%.
Absolutely right, and that's what we say all the time, that this is not magic. This is based on if you're Prince 2 or MSP, absolutely correct. This is entirely based on what is accepted as good practice in the industry.
Brilliant, good to hear. I mean, and I guess that reinforces the point. It's not about reinventing the wheel necessarily. Poll 3 then. So as a program manager, you find that your stakeholders are always consistent. This one's interesting. True 0, false 100%.
I didn't expect it to be quite as dramatic as that, I have to say. But it's if you were to look at where I was expecting the results to be, it's obviously in the right direction. And that really has thrown me, but you're right, and that was the whole point of developing a product matrix and so on, where we went to hundreds of people in the business and said, okay, what do you need? What do you need from the programs and the projects that are delivering for you? Please don't come later on and say, well, I wasn't involved in that one, and you'd never asked me to that, and you haven't filled in this, and so on and so forth. So that was completely the desire to put into one place what everybody needs. Now, that has repercussions in the sense that the people who now own Pathway have to ensure that that one place is kept up to date, because things change. And so the Pathway will only be as good as how up to date it's kept in terms of needs and stakeholder requirements and so on and so forth. Amazed by the dramatic nature of that poll result, but I'm not surprised.
It's quite a good one, that one. And the last poll then, poll 4, was as a program manager, assurance is to be welcomed. True 97%, false 3%.
Okay, that surprises me the other way. In reality, of course, the answer is yes. The assurance is to be welcomed. I think what I find sometimes is assurance is see. So I agree with the result. Of course, I do. Assurance is too often seen as an exam to be passed. let's just get these documents signed, and no one's going to read everything. And it's an exam. It's not an exam to be passed. It's a time to draw breath. It's a way for the program to show off, and at the same time, it is also a time, a way for the program or a project to actually say, look, things aren't working well. We have a number of stakeholders who are not playing the game. Well, hold a stage gate, do an assurance review, and bring those out into the open so you can escalate it. So again, I'm very glad that the population thinks assurance is to be welcomed. My only counsel, I think, is that we tend to treat it as an exam to be passed and somehow got through, rather than a really value-adding part of the whole scheme of things.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And so that's all the polls. So we've got quite a long list of questions here, so we'll go through as many as we can. Question from Sonia: are there any common internal factors which often affect delivery?
The answer would be yes. I mean, it depends which industry you're in, but I'm going to really focus on requirements, which is everybody says, everybody knows, if you don't get your requirements right, then it really becomes very difficult at the end, or through any point actually. So I'm going to stick at that, which is requirements. And if you don't get those, then it becomes very, very difficult.
Okay, thank you. Okay, a question from Richard: how long did it take you to develop Pathway and all the associated support documentation?
Okay, well, Pathway itself, we started off in I think there was an exec meeting in November of 2011. Then we were given the task in January of 2012, and Pathway itself we developed through 2012, so that we had a sort of an organizational milestone with approvals from the top layer in December of 2012. So that's a year, but that's a little bit of a false year, because actually we had done something similar in London Underground previous to that, which gave us a lot of collateral with which to base things on. So if you were starting from scratch, depending on the size of your organization, I think in a large organization, a year and a half from starting off to actually then beginning to roll things out would be a year and a half. And you can look at this in terms of maturity as well. I don't know whether you're familiar with P3M3 maturity scales. That takes about 18 months per level, and developing a methodology would take you about 18 months, I think. Okay,
quite a long-term investment then.
Yeah.
So two questions from two different Richards, but I think they're kind of linked. How did Pathway build upon lessons learned from previous initiatives at TfL, and do all TfL departments use Pathway?
How did we use it? The big lessons, well, two or three really. Two lessons. We involved a lot of people in the development, so that wasn't necessarily lessons learned. That was just good practice. And previously, what we didn't really do in the past with methodologies is support people subsequent to the release. So those are two things, two lessons learned. We really got on board. Just have involvement, have engagement, and then support. Do all areas use it? I think the answer would be yes. We have evidence to say that all areas use it. Whether they use it effectively or efficiently, or whether it sort of sometimes falls back into, well, we have to do it because we have to do it. I'm more ambivalent on that one, to be honest, and I think there is much more work to be done on supporting, on training, on the behaviors, if you like, around the methodology to make it truly effective.
Okay, thank you. A quick question from Richard. In TfL terms, what do you mean by project engineer? Is it just an engineer working on a project?
No, we differentiate between for ease of description. So we have specialist engineers or discipline engineers, and we have project engineers. So they are specifically qualified engineers, because that's what mostly we do, and they sort of coordinate and lead on the engineering activity. But they're absolutely engineers, and they have that specific, and we have role families and so on to specify their main activities, and I can probably share those with you if that helps to differentiate between a project engineer and a discipline engineer.
So the last one from Gary Arnab is really around the effort involved in defining and implementing pathway, which I guess plays to a lot of people's views in terms of, was this your day job? So did you do that full time, or were you doing this on top of your usual day job?
No, my team and I, this was our day job, and that's a very valid question, because you can't do this as a part-time activity. Any change activity you can't do as a part-time activity. So I had a team of about 12, I suppose, but you have to realize that we had 21 different business units and 3,000 people. So that's a lot of areas to get around. So for our scale of organization, I think we had 12 people, and our day job was to really corral and get input from those other 3,000 people to make sure that we had a workable methodology. And so for us, it was our day job. We drew on a lot of people who helped us as part of their day job.